The young and the restless spoilers, the gentle hum of the espresso machine and soft chatter inside crimson lights served as the perfect cover for the kind of meeting that could alter the power dynamics of Genoa City forever. On the surface, it was just another day at the beloved coffee house, but in the far corner, tucked behind the leafy privacy of a potted plant and shielded from casual glances, Kane Ashby leaned in across the table toward Holden Novak with eyes that burned with intensity and purpose. The moment was charged, eerily quiet, profoundly significant. For months, the world had speculated about the identity of the elusive Aristotle Dumas, the reclusive billionaire whose wealth was only matched by the mystery surrounding him. Rumors swirled in whispers behind closed doors. A ghost. A front. A myth. But here, in the soft glow of the cafe lights, the truth shattered the illusion with a sharp, quiet finality. Dumas will soon no longer exist, Kane said, his voice low, deliberate, and unshakably certain. He wasn't merely speaking to Holden. He was issuing an edict, peeling back the layers of deception to reveal a reinvention unlike anything Genoa City had ever seen. This wasn't just an identity reveal. This was a declaration of war. Holden, stunned but trained well enough not to outwardly flinch, registered the weight of the moment. The man before him was not just a chameleon or a puppet master. He was the storm that had been brewing under everyone's nose, preparing to strike with surgical precision. Kane gestured with subtle finality. From now on, use my real name. I'm done hiding. But Kane had never hidden without purpose. Every alias, every shell company, every whispered threat from the shadows had served a singular ambition, to undo the legacy of Victor Newman piece by piece. And now, the game was shifting. He was done being the phantom in the French countryside. It was time to enter the boardroom again, to move like a man reborn, fueled not just by vengeance but by strategy. This revelation was not spontaneous. It was part of a carefully timed orchestration, and Holden had just been cast into the next act. With cold efficiency, Kane laid out the mission. There were 4 targets, for key individuals who were not random pawns, but the very bloodline of Victor Newman himself. Claire Grace. Abby Newman. Adam Newman. Chelsea Lawson. To the casual observer, it might have seemed like a strange assortment, but to Kane, this was calculated warfare. 3 of the 4 were either direct descendants or linked intimately to the Newman dynasty. Claire, the granddaughter whose place in the family had become a source of vulnerability. Abby, the daughter caught between legacy and personal identity. Adam, the prodigal son whose sense of betrayal mirrored Kane's own. And Chelsea, the wild card, a woman with deep ties to both Adam and Connor, emotionally volatile yet intellectually sharp. Kane didn't just want chaos. He wanted control. And for that, he needed Holden to become invisible. A ghost, like he had once been. Holden had already begun weaving threads with Claire, and Kane, though not the type to praise often, offered a rare nod of approval. She trusts you, he muttered. That's leverage. But it wasn't enough. Holden's assignment was about to expand, and with it, the stakes would multiply. Get close to Abby. Understand her rhythms, her routines, her weaknesses. Approach Adam? Not as a threat, but as a potential ally, someone with just enough resentment in his bones to be manipulated. And Chelsea? She was the enigma. The emotional grenade. Connect to her slowly, carefully. She'd explode if handled wrong, but if Holden could find the right angle, she might become the most dangerous piece of all. When Holden, grasping for understanding, attempted to ask how these 4 were connected in the grander design, Kane shut him down immediately. No questions, he said, his tone sharp enough to pierce steel. You don't need the blueprint. You just need to follow orders. It wasn't coldness for its own sake. It was discipline. Kane couldn't afford to explain the endgame to anyone, not yet. The fewer people who knew the whole picture, the less likely it would collapse. Holden was his eyes and ears, not his conscience. And that role, critical as it was, required obedience over insight. But as Holden absorbed the gravity of the task, Kane's mind drifted into darker territory. This was not merely about taking power. It was about reshaping it, stripping away the illusions that Victor had built around his children, his name, his legacy. Victor had spent decades constructing a dynasty with steel and ego, manipulating his family as chess pieces, loving them only when they performed. Kane saw himself in the children Victor failed. Especially Adam, the son who had always been second, who had clawed his way through boardrooms and betrayals just to breathe the same air as his siblings. There was a part of Kane that pitted Adam. But more than that, he intended to use him. Claire was the most fragile. Still emotionally fractured from the revelations surrounding her parentage, she moved through the world like someone still deciding whether she belonged in it. Her link to Cole, to Victoria, made her vulnerable in ways she didn't even comprehend. Holden had found the opening, and now Kane needed him to deepen it. Feed her questions. Feed her fear. Let her crumble under the weight of not knowing who she really was. Abby, for all her strength, had a blind spot for redemption. She believed people could change, that legacies could be repaired. She would be the hardest to infiltrate, but also the most devastating once compromised. Chelsea would present an emotional whirlwind. One misstep and Holden could find himself buried under her rage. But if he succeeded, if he gained her trust, then he would have the perfect conduit to both Adam and Connor, another generation of Newman blood that Kane could manipulate from the sidelines. Kane knew the danger of the plan. He had disappeared for a reason, after all. But he had grown tired of shadows. Tired of pretending. The time for subterfuge was ending. What came next would be brutal, direct, and irreversible. He would strike not at the empire itself, but at its future, its children, its foundation, its legacy. He would force the Newmans to destroy themselves from within. They wouldn't see him coming, because he wouldn't come at all. Holden would. As the meeting at Crimson Lights drew to a close, either man moved quickly. They remained seated for several more minutes, feigning casual conversation as customers walked by, none the wiser to the war being mapped out between coffee cups and polite smiles. Eventually, Kane stood, smoothing the front of his coat, his eyes scanning the room for threats. When he spoke again, his voice was low, final. "We move now," he said. "The longer we wait, the closer Victor gets to the truth. He smells blood. Let's make sure it's not ours." Holden nodded. He understood the mission. He understood the stakes. But what he didn't yet understand, what he couldn't have known, was that secrets were already leaking. That Phyllis Summers had caught wind of something unusual. That Adam had already connected some dots. That Chelsea had seen someone familiar and nice and couldn't shake the feeling of déjà vu. The plan, airtight as it seemed, had cracks. And in Genoa City, cracks were how avalanches began. But Kane didn't worry. Not yet. For now, he had momentum. He had Holden. He had a plan. And he had a name again, one the world would soon remember. Kane Ashby. Not a myth. Not a mask. But the man who had returned to claim what was never offered and to burn what could not be built. The war had begun, and it was personal. In the quiet hours just before dawn, when the streets of Genoa City still slept and the city's power players retreated into the illusion of security, Kane Ashby sat across from Chance Chancellor with a storm raging behind his eyes. It wasn't just the weight of secrets that burdened him now, it was the encroaching dread that somewhere, someone was planning to end his life. Not metaphorically, not financially. Literally. This wasn't just another power play. This was survival. And what made it all the more terrifying was that Kane didn't know who to trust anymore, or if he ever truly had. When Chance arrived, summoned not through official channels but a cryptic message delivered by someone neither of them could trace, he was surprised by Kane's state, not outwardly frantic, but disturbingly composed. It was the kind of calm one sees in men who have accepted the inevitability of the end. "I believe someone's planning to kill me this weekend," Kane said without preamble, the words flat, the implication colossal. Chance blinked, not because he doubted the seriousness, but because he wasn't sure yet if he was listening to a man unraveling or a man who had uncovered something real and lethal. Kane leaned in, lowering his voice but not his suspicion. He wasn't just paranoid, he was calculating. He outlined the timeline. Subtle clues. Withdrawals from shadow accounts. Surveillance cameras deactivated around key safe houses. A brief but undeniable glimpse of a known Newman security contractor near his private estate in Nice. "They're closing in," he muttered. "Someone wants me dead, and I think I know who." But even as he uttered the name Newman, he didn't say which one. That was part of the agony. Because while his eyes burned with the conviction of a man who had seen too much, there was still uncertainty about the exact direction the bullet would come from. Would it be Victor himself, delivering his own brand of final justice? Would it be Nick, tired of watching outsiders threaten the legacy he'd spent his life protecting? Could it be Adam, acting out a twisted mirror of Kane's own obsession with revenge, deciding one ghost didn't belong among the living? Or, perhaps most heartbreakingly, could it be Claire? Chance remained composed, but inwardly, alarms were going off. If Kane was lying, he was doing so with masterful control. But if he was telling the truth, then the city was sitting on the edge of a war that could spill blood across boardrooms, penthouses, and back alleys. "What makes you so sure?" Chance asked, trying to get beyond the fear and into the facts. But Kane didn't offer proof. He offered patterns. Silence where there should have been noise. Movement where there should have been stillness. And above all, the one thing that no amount of technology or guards could protect against, instinct. "I've been around long enough to know when I'm being hunted," Kane said, voice colder than steel. "And this doesn't feel like business. It feels personal." The implication sent shivers through Chance's spine. Because if Victor Newman had sanctioned something, anything, there was rarely a paper trail. He was too smart, too careful, too practiced. But what if it wasn't Victor? What if this was the new generation taking matters into their own hands? After all, Kane had targeted Claire, Abby, Adam, and Chelsea. He had inserted his people into their lives, manipulated connections, forced vulnerabilities. Was it really so hard to believe that one of them had decided enough was enough? Back at Newman Enterprises, the air was thick with tension. Victor paced behind closed doors, staring out the window but seeing far beyond the skyline. He knew something was happening. Reports had come in. Kane was in Genoa City. Not Dumas. Not the myth. The man. The threat. And threats to his empire never went unanswered. But Victor hadn't made a move. Not yet. He was gathering. Watching. Waiting. And while he might not have given the order, he wasn't certain someone else hadn't. His children were no strangers to acting in the shadows. Nick had grown colder in recent months. Adam had gone silent in ways that were dangerous. Even Victoria had disappeared for days after her emotional collapse over Cole. And Claire? She had been spiraling, confused, vulnerable. But she was still a Newman. And Newmans, when cornered, always fought back. Meanwhile, Claire sat in her suite at the Grand Phoenix, staring blankly at the wall, replaying every conversation she'd ever had with Kane, with Holden, with Cole. Her world had become a minefield of betrayals and half-truths. She didn't know who she was anymore, an ally? A target? A ticking time bomb? And worst of all, a question had begun to take root in her mind. Had Cole, her father, her anchor, set this whole thing in motion knowing it might cost her everything? When she received a message from Holden asking to meet, she hesitated. She didn't know if she could trust him. She didn't even know if she could trust herself. In another corner of the city, Chelsea Lawson reviewed a series of images she wasn't supposed to have. They showed Kane, or Dumas as she still thought of him, in the background of several events, places he had no reason to be. Near Connor's school, outside Crimson Lights, near her apartment. She hadn't shared them with Adam yet. She didn't want to believe it. But the feeling in her stomach told her this wasn't coincidence. This was surveillance. This was targeting. And she had just enough experience with men who hid things behind charming eyes to know danger when it was circling. Adam, for his part, had started tracing shell companies connected to Dumas's former holdings. What he found led him to a single conclusion. Kane was dismantling Newman infrastructure from the inside. And that wasn't business. That was war. He wanted to confront Victor, to demand action. But something held him back. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the understanding that if this was truly a matter of family preservation, it might not be Victor's decision to make anymore. And so the city braced. Kane moved through it like a marked man, checking exits, watching windows, keeping every meeting short and every sentence guarded. He didn't know who was coming, only that they were. And he wasn't sure if he was more afraid of dying, or being wrong. Because if no one was hunting him, then he had become the villain in his own story. But if someone was, then Genoa City was about to witness something it hadn't seen in years, a power player killed not by scandal or financial ruin, but by calculated, personal vengeance. Chance, now burdened with a truth he hadn't asked for, began pulling threads. Discreet inquiries. Shadow surveillance. A quiet warning to a judge friend about enhanced protection for Kane. And through it all, the same question haunted him: would he risk his badge, his life, to protect a man like Kane? A man who had made enemies not just in boardrooms but in hearts? There was no easy answer. And as the weekend approached, the city held its breath. Because someone, somewhere, had made a decision. And once blood is spilled, there is no going back.